Hello and welcome to the Rays of Hope program brought to you by the Purchase Area Sexual Assault and Child Advocacy Center. I'm your host today, Mary Foley, and I'm so glad you've joined us. We have a special guest with us, Vonnie Adams from the Merryman House Domestic Crisis Center. And Vonnie, thank you so much for coming today. I know it's a busy time of year, but boy, it's busy, and that then indicates the need for us to do a show and to talk to the public about the important topics of domestic violence. So thanks for being here.
We thank you so much for giving us the opportunity, Mary.
Well, tell the viewer who you are and what you do at Merryman House.
I'm Vonnie Adams, and I'm the executive director at the Merryman House. I've been there just a little bit over 4 years. We have a variety of services. Over the years, domestic violence programs have evolved from simply shelters to facilities that offer a variety of services as well as outreach. So our primary focus, of course, always has been and will continue to be emergency shelter for women and children and sometimes men who are fleeing domestic violence in their home. And here in Paducah, we're fortunate to have a 32-bed facility.
Wow.
Right now, we're almost at maximum capacity, and we have been since about March. But that doesn't stop us in any way from helping victims find safety. So we would never want anybody to think, oh, well, they're full, I can't come.
Sure.
We do find other avenues, and we have lots of couches, and we have a way to keep people safe on an emergency basis. We don't have a timeline. A lot of people assume that an emergency shelter has, oh, well, I can go there for 30 days and then I'll have to get out. That's not the type of facility that we run. You can stay as long as you need to, as long as you're working towards living free of domestic violence and being self-sufficient.
I see.
And so at some point, if we don't seem to be helping you do that, then we might ask you to, find other facilities, find another avenue. But other than that, you're welcome to stay as long as you need to, because it's our goal to keep you safe as long as we need to keep you safe until you're really ready to live on your own and free from the violence. We have a variety of programs in shelter. A lot of women come to us with medical needs that haven't been identified previously because of the violence in the relationship and the limited access to outside resources. We work with the West Kentucky system for educational purposes, as well as Murray State University. We have some employment type opportunities available to individuals and help them connect to employers in the community that we know will help them stay safe while they're working, as well as help them get some job skills. One of our most recent additions to our services is some of our housing programs.
Wow.
And we have both transitional and permanent housing programs. And expanding on that probably more quickly than any of our other support services, because housing is one of the primary reasons that women return to their abuser, is because of the shelter issue of having a roof over your head. That's the primary reason they often give us for, I have to go back because I have to be able to, for me and my children to have a place to live.
Well, I think, each time that we sit down and talk, I'm amazed at just the breadth and depth of services that you do provide and that people may not be aware of. But before we even get to some of those components, I was astounded when you said we're almost to capacity, when I think probably viewers may be watching and going, what? Domestic violence here? What does that even mean, and what do you mean that you're to capacity? And so I'd like to just talk about domestic violence here. The fact that you are full indicates that it's a problem, but it's just probably scratching the surface of the problem.
I think so many people have a Hollywood conception of what domestic violence is, that if you walked into our shelter that you would see women with broken arms and women with blacked eyes or their teeth knocked out or that type of thing. In reality, domestic violence is one of the people in the relationship is asserting power and control over the other one. And that does not necessarily mean that it is violent in nature, even though we use the word domestic violence. They may be doing that in some other ways, which don't show any outward signs like a black eye. In fact, most perpetrators, and what we like to say smart perpetrators, have learned that if you truly want to control somebody, you absolutely do not want to leave marks on your partner, because everybody else can see that, and therefore you lose power. Because if someone knows what potentially might have made that injury, then you lose power in that relationship. So often what we find is initially a lot of verbal and mental control.
And so give me some examples of what that might look like.
Telling you you're a bad parent, telling you you're ugly, telling you you're a horrible mother, telling you that you don't know how to clean the house correctly, that you can't drive. And a lot of younger relationships and a lot of teen relationships, nobody else would want you. I'm the only other person that you would ever fall in love with. No one else will want you after you've been with me. Using a lot of psychological, mental, and you think, oh, well, that wouldn't bother me. Maybe not the first time out. But if it's continual and you are looking for something in a relationship, and you have not been in many relationships, you don't have a lot of experience in healthy relationships, sometimes those overbearing, you know, I'm the only one for you, can come across as a very nurturing and a very caring, I'm totally focused on you, I'm obsessed with you, can come across as a positive thing, when in fact it's really not. It's a very negative thing. It's a very controlling thing.
And one of the things that you had shared with me in our conversations together was that it could start out, like you're saying, appearing healthy, appearing okay, but quickly deteriorate.
Right.
And as it begins to deteriorate, what are some of the signs and symptoms and consequences to the victim?
Well, I think one of the main things for women to notice is if the relationship progresses very, very quickly. You've been on 3 dates and he's already telling you that he loves you and wanting to know where you are all of the time, or maybe even 2 dates. At first, that can almost seem complimentary, like, oh gosh, you know, I'm really doing it for him. This is great. This is wonderful. I've never had anybody fall for me like that. Almost putting you up on a pedestal. That's a huge red flag, because that's just not normal, I guess. Most of us would never, you know, we would want to get to know somebody. Obviously, the first couple of dates, I think with the internet now especially, because you have this breach of, you don't really see the person and you can exaggerate, and you can, sometimes if you've met, and especially in that type of relationship, things can progress very, very quickly because you're using words to express yourself and you're not truly being honest with those words. Same thing happens in a face-to-face relationship too, in that they're telling you all of these things and it's moving very, very rapidly. And there's a part of you that feels wonderful about that, but it's that little nagging thing that some women say there was something about it that just didn't seem, how could he be that in love with me that quickly? He doesn't even know me. And once they get out of the relationship and they reflect on it, then they remember that little nagging thing that was at the back of their head saying, something's just not right here. How can he be falling in love that quickly? But all of us want to be needed. All of us want to be loved. That's a natural human tendency. And so it's very, very easy. They're very, very skillful at that part, that initial, what we call like a honeymoon phase, where everything is lovely, you can do no wrong, they're so in love with you, everything is beautiful. It's just it's a very overwhelming, and when it's real in a healthy relationship, it is a fantastic feeling. But unfortunately, in a domestic violence relationship, that happens way, way, way at the very beginning, and in a very unnatural setting, way before each person really knows the other one.
One of the things that I know that we discover with sexual assault perpetrators, and I'm sure with domestic violence perpetrators, is you used a word that I do want to sort of focus in on, and that is skill. That they are skillful in their ability to groom, their ability to manipulate, their ability to identify vulnerability that they're going to use for their advantage. And so for people that are watching, that maybe some of the things that you've said, they're starting to think, this isn't a healthy relationship. And so then people somehow come into contact with your center, whether it's through the shelter, whether it's through a support service. And so let's just take those in two arms. Let's take those, let's talk about those women who are at the place where they feel like they have to get out and maybe don't know what to do, maybe don't know what that's going to look like, what that's going to be like. What would you say to them today?
Well, first of all, I want them to recognize that I understand it's not about leaving, because leaving implies that you have options. If you say to us, why didn't you just leave? Well, that implies that I could, that I could just pick up my things and walk out the door. Those of us who work in domestic violence centers and who've been through domestic violence ourselves understand that that is not reality. Reality is that you're trying to escape. And so when you start using words like I'm trying to escape, that involves planning. If you talk to any person who's ever been a prisoner of war, for instance, or I think of John McCain and his discussions about how he planned over and over and over how he was going to get out of that situation. It's very, very similar in a domestic violence relationship, in that if you truly want to leave and you want to leave safely, it's not an instantaneous decision that you make.
Okay.
You truly are going to have to take a step back and plan for your escape and figure out when is going to be the best time. Look for their vulnerabilities. Have the things that you're going to need when you do leave, like a little cash stashed away. Maybe you've packed a bag and taken it over to a friend's house so that you have some basic necessities that you're going to need. It's not always that easy. Sometimes it becomes down to fight or flight. And of course, we always recommend flight. Don't stay and try to fight it out. Don't do that.
So you mentioned some very important things just right there that I think is critical, and that is to begin to reclass your own self
Right.
from somebody that just has to take this to somebody that is a prisoner in
Right.
their own home, and that's a
Right.
mental shift that has to occur.
It's
I would
a big
think first.
shift. It's a big shift, because most people feel very hopeless and very, and that's part of the prisoner mentality, in that you're being controlled completely by someone else. If you can ever just recognize that, and that, okay, now if I'm going to take it back, I'm the only one that's going to be able to do that. If you're waiting for your mom or your sister or somebody to help you escape, that's not going to happen. You truly have got to start making your own plan on what will work for you. The other thing to remember is, when you do decide to escape, the lethality at that point escalates tremendously.
Okay.
Because that is his first, and I'm saying his because that's generally what we work with, that's his first recognition that, hey, maybe you're serious and I might lose power here. And so in order to take it back, the violence has to escalate tremendously in order to get your attention.
Okay.
And make you a believer that if he's ever said, if you ever try to leave, I'll kill you, or if you ever try to leave, I'll kill myself, it's at that point in time that it's most likely, in that sort of insane, uncontrolled moment, that really truly can happen. And I don't want to make light of that at all. When a woman tries to escape, that's probably the most lethal, dangerous situation, and that's why it's critical that she do those safety planning steps before she ever tries to leave. Maybe you go purchase yourself a pay-as-you-go type cell phone, and activate it, but stash it away so that it's somewhere that you can have it when you need it. He won't know the number. He won't know that you have it. You can call, anybody in the police, whoever that you might need to call, family member, whoever's going to help you once you decide to escape, to have that stashed. The cash is probably the hardest thing for women who are in a domestic violence to come up with, because cash is part of the control. Most of the time they're in a financial situation where they have no power and control over the family's finances, or they've not been allowed to work. And so working with some of our staff in our outreach offices and that type of thing, they will teach some techniques on how to, even if it's 50 cents, the change from a soda that you bought for your child or whatever, just hang on to it.
And
eventually it will build to a point where you've got a little bit tucked away.
So the cash, the cell phone, what else?
Clothes. I think all of us want to have some basic necessities. I don't mean go in there and pack every outfit that you have, but be sure that you have, at least for yourself, one change of clothing, and at least one change of clothing for your children. Also, any personal toiletry type items or medications are real critical too, because oftentimes those are the things you forget because they're in the medicine cabinet and they're such a part of your daily routine that you forget, oh, I need to put my blood pressure medicine or my insulin or the things that you need actually to live and be healthy. You forget to stash those away. Oftentimes we train women to get a second prescription and put that with their stash, their bag, so that they don't have to worry about, I got to go to the medicine cabinet and get my medication.
What about things like Social Security cards or identifying information?
Of course, we all like to think we would grab our purse. If we didn't get anything else and the house is burning down, we're going to grab our purse. In reality, I can't tell you how many times women come into shelter and that's the one thing they forgot to grab was their purse. So anything that you have as far as important documents, and I know it sounds crazy, but maybe even a copy of your marriage certificate, because some of the power and control comes up. Birth certificates of your children, that have his name on it. I can't tell you how many times I've had perpetrators say, oh, well, those aren't my kids, as a way to continue to take power and control over her. I'm not paying you any child support, especially if they weren't married and they were just cohabitating and they had children together. All of a sudden, oh, those aren't mine. She had those with someone else. So any documents that you have that prove who you are, you know, college education documents, shot records for your children, medical records, anything that you have in your home that would prove anything about you, your medical history, your marriage history, divorce history, anything like that. We always recommend that you try to at least get a copy of that, or know where there is a copy of it if it's not a safe situation for you to try to copy that in your home.
Well, and you bring up, I think, another caveat, married versus cohabitating, and viewers may be thinking, well, is it really domestic violence if I'm not married, and does the law protect that? And would you speak to that for the viewers today?
We've come a long way in the state of Kentucky. In the early 90s is actually when there were domestic violence laws passed. So in all honesty, you know, my mother, your mother, women in the past had no laws to protect them, period, whether they were married or not. You know, this is a fairly new law. Around the early 2000s is when it expanded to cover cohabitating individuals and individuals who share a child in common. But it still does not cover individuals who are dating. So if you're in a dating relationship, and maybe every now and then you stay at each other's homes, but you don't say we're cohabitating, we don't share the same address, we don't share the same electric bill, cable bill, those types of things, the laws simply still do not protect you. And there are a lot of women who find themselves in that situation, especially young women on college campuses and that type of thing, who find themselves in a very violent relationship, both mentally and sometimes physically, but there's simply no laws to protect them unless they cross the line into your area, into like a sexual assault, or they can prove stalking or harassment, which are very, very difficult to prove if you aren't in a long-term committed relationship.
So you're saying laws that currently exist on the books for felonies and those sorts of things obviously would apply, but just in terms of classifying something as a domestic violence situation that then would have protective
and a very
orders
skilled person who has been in multiple, and I'm talking about perpetrators now, who've been in multiple relationships, they know the laws very well, they know where the line is, and they're very careful not to cross it, because you have no power at all when you're incarcerated.
So Vonnie, you have told women what that they need to first have that mental shift. And the reason why I think that's so important is because it maybe would bring some of that, for a play on words, I guess, some of that fight back within them, that I am in prison here and I need to get out. Once they have that shift, you've given them some tools to put together their plan of escape. Right. So that moment comes, now what do they do?
Okay, that's where we sort of kick in at this point. Hopefully in your safety plan it is included a location where you truly can be safe. The police department, emergency room at the hospital would be the two that I would recommend at the top of my list. That you plan to, this is where I'm going, this is where me and my children are immediately going. We're not going to look back, we're in the car, we're leaving, and this is where we're going right now. Those are the two safest places. And immediately walk in and tell them exactly what's going on, and staff there are trained to immediately go into action should he follow you to those facilities. That's going to be very unlikely that he's going to march into the police station behind you and say, come home right now, and start throwing a big fit. Same thing at a hospital. There's something sort of like sacred ground. Some people choose a church because that's a place where they feel very safe and nurtured. The only difference there is most pastoral care type people have not been trained in this particular crisis, maybe to the extent that law enforcement or a hospital would be. If there's no facility like that anywhere near you, then we would recommend that you use a place of business, any public place whatsoever, a restaurant, anywhere where they're going to be less likely to make a scene, where other people could be harmed, because really the only person they want to harm is you. So if you bring other people into that mix, it makes it more difficult for them to do what they want to do with other people present, witnesses present. They're going to be less likely to do that. The last resort would be family and friends.
Someplace easily
because
accessible.
they definitely know where those people live in almost all cases, and that is probably the least intimidating to them. As far they see them as part of the problem, as part of you, because they are. If that's your mother, she is a part of you, you know. And so it's sort of a sick way of looking at it, but it is. It's like an extended portion of you, and so we would really highly discourage people from taking the violence to family, and especially if you've had a friend that's been in your life a lot and has known what's going on, and the friend knows what's going on, he's going to be less likely to be intimidated by the friend as well. So
Vonnie, you all have outreach offices
Sure.
to give people education, to give them support, to help them get back up on their feet. You have immediate intervention services in terms of the shelter. And so I guess if I am a woman watching this program, I might be thinking, that all sounds good, except I've got 4 children.
Right.
And now what?
And the other thing is, you may love him. You know, you may love him on some level, and a lot of people don't understand that. But if you talk to anybody who's in perhaps an unhealthy relationship, maybe you live with a gambler, maybe you live with someone who's an alcoholic. I mean, what they say is, well, it's not like this all the time, and I love them, and they're the father of my children. So it's just another complicating issue, and I understand that. We all understand that. But the issue is, it comes down to, is that love worth dying for?
Right.
Is it, and that truly is an individual decision that any victim has to decide at some point in time. Because we can almost guarantee you, if you continue to live in that relationship, it will never get better. Whether or not he kills you, whether or not he kills the children, is still up for debate. But the bottom line, 100% of the time, is it will never get better. It will only get worse. And so it comes down to, how much am I willing to pay with my own person, my own self-esteem, my own physical well-being, the well-being of my children? You know, what is the cost? And every woman has to make that decision for herself. You know, when have I paid enough for this love that I have? And once you decide that, it becomes a little bit easier. Everybody says in shelter, I hit a bottom. I got to a bottom. And that is different for every single woman. I wish, Mary, so badly that I could look out there and say, okay, ladies, this is it. This is when you need to leave. But you just simply cannot. It really is an individual decision. A lot of women, when he crosses the line and starts abusing the children, that's their bottom. When they recognize that projecting of violence on them is now onto their children. In most domestic violence homes, 50% of the children are abused as well. Some of them say that when they notice their sons begin to treat them the same way that their husband treats them, that's another bottom for some. You know, it's like a realization, like, uh-oh, I've got to get out of here, because now he is starting to behave just like his dad, and I don't want that. Right.
Well, and I think it would be important here to point out that, you know, obviously part of what keeps us in those situations is we think, well, that won't happen. This has happened to me, but that part won't happen to me. Or, Vonnie, I'm not that other 50%. And so I think to even speak to the fact that kids do learn what they see. They learn from modeling, and so they are at risk if they're in that environment. And if at this moment the self-esteem for the woman is at the place where they may not realize, or they may not feel worth fighting for, there is a child there that is seeing and witnessing and taking part in that in some way.
And I think so many adults, I think we all do that. We kid ourselves in that, well, our children don't realize what's happening.
Right.
It's, even when they're very young, you know, and you may be in a healthy relationship, but you've had a disagreement, and you think, oh, well, they didn't really know what was happening. I think that's pretty unrealistic. In reality, that's probably one of the hardest things we deal with in shelter, is when families come in and the mother then hears what the child has written in their journal, and it suddenly becomes very clear that they knew long before what was going on, and how long and how desperate they wanted their mother to leave, or maybe they were too young to tell her. You know, it's just, I think it's one of the most painful, emotional experiences to watch some of those women go through. What they thought they were doing was doing the right thing for their children, and when their children feel safe for the first time and feel safe enough to tell their mom what they felt and how they felt, sometimes it's just so, I just want to heal them immediately, and it takes time, and that's all a good thing. That's all a healthy thing to get that out in the open. But it's just a really, really emotional time sometimes for women in shelter, because they've tried so hard to do what society tells them to do, to keep the marriage together, to keep the children with their father, those types of things. I mean, the area, this part of the country that we live in, I mean, that is we are very traditional in that respect, and a lot of women think this is what I need to do, this is the best thing for my children. He may not be the greatest person in the world to me, but he's still their dad, and they need to grow up in the household with them. And I think sometimes when the realization comes that maybe that wasn't true, that maybe that wasn't the best option, it's just a really, really hard time for women. And I know they struggle with that. But if that's what's holding you there, you know, go and talk to someone about what your options are. Don't just sit and think, oh, well, I've got to stay because this is the father of my children.
Sure, and I think that's just
it doesn't have to be
advice.
us. It may be your pastor, it may be a counselor, it may be just a good trusted friend, you know, that you feel like can be objective.
And to just be able to start having that conversation
About this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling trapped, I'm feeling hopeless, and I'm worried for my children. I don't know how they're reacting to what's going on.
Vonnie, it's such a broad topic, it's such an important topic, and I do think, much like sexual violence, we just see the tip of the people that actually come in and make that report or come in to shelter or do those things. And so we are almost out of time for today. Just briefly before we go, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to the viewer that's contemplating the many things that you have said today, what would that be?
Don't be embarrassed if you've left before and went back.
Okay.
It's okay. Most women leave 7, 8, 9, 10. There isn't a magical number.
Okay.
And even if you just left for a few hours and returned home, that counts. Okay. And it will take you several times to get to the point. Don't make yourself do something that we know you can't possibly do today. I think people think it's just an instantaneous decision and I've got to up and leave. That's not how it normally takes place. And don't beat yourself up if you keep going back. What you're doing is what you think is best. You're a grown up. You need to make decisions for yourself, and that's taking your power back. Even if you go back, it's your decision. And being confident in that you want to give it one more shot. Obviously, we're always going to be here. You can come 7, 8, 9, 10 times to our facility. I had a young girl in there recently, left, was back 2 weeks later, and she was just bawling. She said, I'm so embarrassed. I said, why? I'm so grateful you're here. You know, that's what we're all about. If you have to come 20 times before you can live on your own and want to be free from the violence, that's what we're there for. So please, if you've left and gone to moms, you've left and gone to your friends, and you've gone back, don't ever be ashamed of that. That shows that you're trying to get your power back, that you're trying to make decisions for yourself, and that's the first step.
Well, and I really think it is the first step that we wanted to cover today, and I hope that you will be a guest again to give viewers that second step, that third step, as we educate people together about the reality of this problem, but about the services in this wonderful community in which we live. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of the Rays of Hope program. Remember, if you are a viewer and this particular topic is not going on in your life right now, the Merryman House Domestic Crisis Center can certainly use your assistance with toiletry items, donations. Please do your part to ensure a safer community. The phone number for the Merryman House Domestic Crisis Center will be appearing on your screen. If you need to contact them for crisis services, please do so. If you'd like more information about their services, please contact them. They will be happy to speak with you. And until we see one another again, please be a part of the solution and join us again for Rays of Hope.